Hours before my son's wedding, I got a message that broke my heart in two. I was in the guest room of a small inn near the church, sitting in silence with my hands folded, watching the snow begin to settle on the windowsill. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and lavender. My dress hung neatly on the wardrobe door, ironed and waiting. The phone buzzed beside me, a text from an unknown number. Just one line. Don't tell your son. Look inside his workshop. No greeting. No signature. The words sat stark on the screen like a slap. I didn't move right away. The wedding was in 6 hours. The hairdresser was on her way. I had my shoes laid out, my speech half written. There was nothing in my life at that moment that wasn't pointed towards celebration. But something about the message made my stomach drop. Not fear exactly, but something more quiet and familiar, like the moment you realize a door you thought was locked has been open all along. I stared at the message for another full minute. Then I stood. Not quickly, not dramatically. Just enough to acknowledge the shift. Whatever came next, I needed to face it while I still had time to decide what to do. I put on my coat, stepped outside, and turned toward the small building behind our house, the workshop my son had built the summer he turned 20. The path to the workshop was half cleared, snow crunching beneath my boots in uneven patches. I noticed, as I walked, how still the world had gone, no wind, no birdsong, just the quiet hum of morning thick with expectation. My son had always been particular about that building. He kept it locked, organized, his private place for fixing things, building furniture, sometimes just being alone. I'd only been inside twice, both times years ago, when he needed help moving lumber. There was no lock now. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I paused on the threshold. The air inside was warm from a space heater humming in the corner, but it was the smell that struck me first, sweet, cloying, unfamiliar. Not the scent of wood or oil or dust. Something chemical. The lights were already on. At first, I didn't see her. Tools were neatly arranged on the wall, a workbench stood clean and ready, shelves stacked with boxes and cloths and labeled bins. It looked ordinary. The sort of place you'd glance over and forget. Then my eyes adjusted. In the far corner, behind a rolling curtain and a stack of crates, was a chair. And in it, a woman. Her arms were bound behind her. Her ankles, too. A strip of white cloth across her mouth. Her eyes wide and wet. I didn't scream. I didn't run. I think some part of me, the oldest, most protective part, understood what this meant before the rest of my mind caught up. I stepped forward. My voice, when it came, was low, steady. Are you hurt? She nodded, quickly, desperately. I reached her in 3 steps, pulled the cloth from her mouth first, then went to work on the knots. They were tight, almost too tight for my fingers, but I kept working. She didn't speak right away, just gasped and coughed, her breath shaky. When I finally got her free, she leaned forward and gripped my arms. Please, she said. My name is Anna. He said he had to keep me here until the wedding. I stared at her. She was young, mid-20s maybe. Her hair was pinned in curls, and her dress, God, her dress, was ivory satin with lace across the sleeves. I'd seen it before. Hanging in the closet at our house. The dress we'd picked out last spring. The dress my son's fiancée had chosen. You're supposed to marry my son today, I said, my mouth dry. Anna's face crumpled. No. I was. But he told me he needed time. That I couldn't talk to anyone yet. That it was just temporary. But he left me here. I've been here since Wednesday. 3 days. I steadied her by the shoulders. Can you walk? She nodded. Yes. But there's something else. He said if I left, someone would get hurt. My daughter. He said she's with his friend in the mountains. That they're watching her. I blinked. Your daughter. She's 6. He said they had cameras. That if I told anyone, they'd hurt her. He showed me pictures. He knows where she is. My hands began to shake. Slowly, quietly. I closed the workshop door behind us and helped Anna into the house. She was trembling, and I wrapped her in one of the old wool blankets from the hall closet, made her tea she didn't drink. She sat at the kitchen table, eyes darting to the window. And then she said something that changed everything again. There's a folder, she said. He made me sign papers. Said it was part of our future. He left it for you. I found it where she said, in the kitchen drawer, beneath the placemats. My name was written across the top. Inside were documents I couldn't understand at first. Photographs of Anna and my son at different places, restaurants, parks, apartments. A certificate with a date from last year. A marriage certificate. Her name and his. A legal wedding. A year ago. He was already married. There was more. Letters. Records. Medical information for a child. My son's handwriting on post-it notes, reminders, plans, contact numbers. Every page added weight to the cold sinking inside me. I closed the folder and sat down across from Anna. You're not the woman standing at the altar today, are you? She shook her head. No. Her name is Elise. Elise. The woman I'd only met twice. Blonde, polite, from a well-off family that had paid for most of the wedding. The woman I assumed would be my daughter-in-law. The one my son had paraded at the engagement party 6 months ago. I sat back in my chair, pressing a hand to my mouth. It didn't make sense. Except it did. When I stopped trying to fit it into something rational, something forgivable, it made perfect, calculated sense. He had used Anna. Married her, hidden her, and somehow convinced her to stay silent. He had a child with her. A daughter he hadn't told anyone about. And now, on his wedding day, he'd left her in a locked workshop and gone off to marry another woman. For what? Money? Status? A second life? I didn't ask Anna why she didn't go to the police. I already knew. Fear is a strong enough leash. Fear for your child is iron. I thought about the years I'd spent raising him. The scraped knees and late-night talks. The bedtime stories, the packed lunches, the college move-in day. The mother-son dances, the quiet evenings where he'd tell me about his dreams. How do you fit this into that? How do you hold both truths in your hands? He had built a lie so intricate I hadn't seen a single thread unravel, until now. But I saw it clearly then. All of it. And I knew what I had to do. I would go to the wedding. I would wear the dress, sit in the front row, smile for the photographs. I would not yell or cry or confront him in whispers behind a church pillar. I would be exactly who he expected me to be. Until it was time not to be. I had 6 hours to decide what kind of mother I was going to be. The kind who looked away, who let the truth rot quietly inside her for the sake of appearances, or the kind who understood, perhaps too late, that silence is a choice, and every choice leaves a mark. I didn't tell Anna what I planned. She didn't ask. After everything, I think she could tell I wasn't a woman to waste time with panic. I helped her upstairs to the spare room, told her to lock the door and open it for no one but me. Then I picked up the phone and called the only person I knew who wouldn't hesitate. Grace Hoffman. An old friend, once a police officer, now a private investigator. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but there are certain bonds time doesn't erase, especially when you've both lived through betrayal. She answered on the third ring. Marianne. Her voice was all steel and surprise. "I need a favor," I said. "A quick one. Quiet. No police." "Not yet." I told her everything. Not every word, not every tear. I didn't have time for poetry. Just the facts. A woman locked in a workshop. A child in the mountains. My son, his double life. The photos, the threats, the timeline. Grace didn't interrupt. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. "What's your address? And then, can you get the woman to give me a name for the friend who has her child?" She arrived within 45 minutes, just as the hairdresser pulled into the driveway. I met her at the side entrance, handed her the folder, and whispered the name Anna had given me. "Stephen P. Loring," I said. "Supposedly a friend of my son's from college. Lives out near Ridgewood Pass." Grace nodded, her expression unreadable. She took the documents, tucked them in her bag, and said only, "I'll find the girl." Then she disappeared back into the car, no sirens, no fuss. That was always her gift. Inside the house, the hairdresser had begun unpacking her tools. She greeted me cheerfully, no idea the weight I carried in my chest, the tremor under my skin. I let her work. Let her curl my hair, pin it, powder my face. I answered her questions about the ceremony, the guests, the color palette. I smiled where appropriate. It was like dressing for a play I hadn't auditioned for. By noon, I was stepping into the car that would take me to the church. The sky had brightened slightly. No snow now, just the sharp, cold clarity of winter that makes everything feel more honest. When we arrived, the church was already filling. I saw familiar faces, and new ones, friends from Elisa's family, colleagues, cousins. I moved through the foyer slowly, stopping to greet those who expected warmth from me. "Mary Ann, you must be so proud. Oh, what a lovely ceremony it's going to be. Elise is radiant." I smiled. Thanked them. Nodded. But my mind was elsewhere, on a mountain cabin, on a little girl whose name I hadn't even been told, on a folder full of truths, now in the hands of someone who knew how to use them. The wedding coordinator ushered me to the front row. My son was already at the altar. He looked content. Not ecstatic. Not nervous. Just calmly composed. He wore the same half-smile he'd had as a teenager, the one that said nothing ever quite touched him deeply. He caught my eye for a moment and nodded, just a small acknowledgement between mother and son. He had no idea. Elise walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered like snow. She looked beautiful. Confident. And innocent. That was the worst part. She had no idea either. She stood beside him, her hand slipping into his, and I wondered how many lies she'd already swallowed. How many more she'd have to choke down if no one stopped this. The ceremony began. Words floated above me, readings, blessings, vows rehearsed and repeated. I watched it all with a stillness that felt borrowed, like my body had stepped aside to let something more focused take its place. And then the officiant reached the part. "If anyone here knows of any reason why these two should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." Silence. Except I stood. There was a rustle, confused, surprised. A few gasps. My son turned to me, his expression flickering for the first time that day. From polite curiosity to alarm. I didn't look at him. I looked straight at the officiant. "I have a reason," I said clearly. The room went still. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope Grace had returned to me just 20 minutes before the ceremony. Inside were copies. Not the originals, those were already in safe hands. But enough. Photos. Documents. The marriage certificate. A timeline of events. A statement from Anna. Proof. I handed them to the officiant. You'll want to read those aloud, I said. He hesitated. Looked down. Then began reading. And everything changed. Voices rose. Chairs scraped. Elise stepped back from my son as if he'd caught fire. The officiant's voice wavered but kept going. The facts were undeniable. My son, already married. A child. False identity on the license application. Deception at every level. My son tried to speak. He took a step toward me. But I raised my hand. Not in warning. In finality. No, I said. You don't speak now. I do. He froze. I turned to the guests. You all came here today for a wedding. What you're witnessing instead is the end of a lie. I won't let my silence bless this. I won't let a child grow up hidden. Or a woman remain erased. Elisa's father came forward then, shouting. Security appeared. Somewhere in the distance, someone called for the police. But I stayed where I was. Because this was mine to finish. And I wasn't finished yet. The morning after the wedding, that is, after what was meant to be a wedding, I didn't answer the phone. The messages started before sunrise. Some from guests, some from family, a few from numbers I didn't recognize. I could tell which ones were sent before they'd read the full story, and which came after. There's a tone people take when they realize they're standing too close to scandal. It sounds like concern, but it's really just fear that your misfortune might rub off on them. I didn't return any of them. I wasn't ready to explain, or defend, or smooth things over for anyone. What I'd done was necessary. Not theatrical. Not impulsive. Just necessary. And I didn't owe anyone an apology for that. I did call Anna. She answered immediately. Her voice was quiet, her words careful, as if she were still afraid of being overheard. I don't know what happens now, she said. You go home, I told her. You take your daughter, and you start fresh. You don't need to answer to anyone. Not him. Not his family. Not even me. There was a pause. Then she said something that stayed with me. He always told me you were kind. That if anything happened to him, I should find you. I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. He had prepared for the possibility that something would go wrong. Not completely, not well, but enough to suggest he knew what he was doing was fragile. That it couldn't last. And in whatever version of the future he imagined, I was the fallback. The person who'd clean up after him, again. That wouldn't happen now. By Tuesday, Anna and Lila were on a train headed west. I had helped arrange the tickets. Grace had provided the contact for a legal advocate who specialized in relocation cases. I didn't ask where exactly Anna was going. I didn't need to know. All that mattered was that the girl was with her mother, and that the man who had tried to keep them apart would never get the chance again. My son had tried to call from county lockup. I saw the number on the caller ID and let it ring. He left a voicemail. I listened once. It was exactly what I expected. Not anger. Not guilt. Just confusion, disbelief. As if he still thought I'd eventually take his side. As if this was all a misunderstanding that could be undone with a better explanation. I didn't delete the message, but I never listened to it again. Instead, I wrote him a letter. A real one. Paper and pen. I wanted him to feel the weight of it. I kept it plain, not angry. I told him what I'd seen, what I'd learned, what I could no longer excuse. You lied to people who trusted you. You made a woman disappear, and a child into a secret. You did that not out of desperation, but out of entitlement. And you expected me to stand by and let it happen because I'm your mother. But being your mother does not mean I cover for you. It means I teach you what is right. And if you've lost sight of that, I'll remind you now. I mailed it without ceremony. No return address. No invitation for more. After that, I focused on my own home. The quiet returned first. Then the normal things, the sound of the kettle, the birds at the feeder, the garden needing attention. I cleaned the spare bedroom where Anna had rested. I stripped the sheets, folded the blanket, wiped down the windowsill. I didn't rush to empty the workshop. I let it be. I knew I'd deal with it eventually, but I didn't feel compelled to treat it like a crime scene or a shrine. Just another part of the house that would be repurposed, in time. The messages from relatives started changing in tone by the end of the week. First there were the ones who wanted more information. What exactly had he done? How did I find out? Was it really necessary to interrupt the ceremony? Then came the ones trying to smooth things over. You didn't have to do it like that. You could have handled it quietly. Families go through things. It doesn't mean we destroy each other in public. They wanted to make it a matter of decorum. As if the real transgression wasn't what my son had done, but that I had exposed it where others could see. I stopped replying altogether. I didn't owe explanations to people who had decided their comfort was more important than a child's safety. There were some exceptions. A letter from Elise, surprisingly. Short, but not cruel. She wrote that she was shocked and devastated, but that she didn't blame me. She thanked me for sparing her from a marriage built on lies. I believed she meant it, though I knew it would take her time to see the full shape of what had happened. She hadn't just been betrayed by a man she loved. She'd been handed a future that wasn't real. I also heard from Grace a few times. She never asked how I was holding up. She didn't need to. Instead, she sent small updates. Lila had started asking questions about her father. Anna had found a part-time job. The court process was moving slowly, but steadily. It would take time, but they were safe. Eventually, I started sleeping through the night again. I picked up a few new habits, walking more, cooking for myself instead of just eating what was easy. I took an old table from the attic and refinished it out in the garage. I thought about turning the workshop into a greenhouse. I didn't want to erase the past, but I wasn't going to live inside it either. A month passed. Then two. One afternoon, a package arrived. No note. Just a postcard inside, sunlight on a beach, the kind of place that feels warm even through a photograph. On the back, in a child's uneven handwriting, "Thank you for helping my mommy. Lila." I set it on the bookshelf beside the radio. I didn't frame it or pin it to the fridge. It didn't need a special place. It already meant enough. I don't expect to see Anna or Lila again, not soon. I don't need them to visit or call to know that what I did mattered. It's not about building new relationships to replace the old ones. It's about living in a way I can respect. I still pass my son's old bedroom sometimes. I still have photos of him around the house. I haven't taken them down. Not because I'm clinging to the past, but because I don't believe in rewriting it. He was my child. He still is. But the story is different now, and I'm not pretending otherwise. What I feel these days isn't grief, exactly. It's quieter than that. More durable. Like a river that's changed course after a flood. Everything is still here, but the shape has shifted. I've learned not to chase reconciliation where it isn't earned. And I've stopped believing that silence is the price of peace. If there's a lesson in all this, I suppose it's this: love can't fix what someone is determined to hide. And no matter how much we give, there comes a time when holding someone accountable is the only way to love them honestly. That's what I did. And I don't regret it. Spring came late that year. The trees outside my kitchen window were slow to bloom, and the ground stayed hard until well into April. Still, I kept to my routine. Every morning I'd walk the length of the garden, gloves in my pocket, checking the roses and trimming back the winter kill. It gave my hands something to do while my thoughts caught up. The calls had mostly stopped by then. The people who had once been so loud with their opinions had grown quiet, distracted by other dramas. That's how it works. Even when your life feels permanently cracked open, the rest of the world keeps moving. Eventually, the story becomes old news. You stop being the center of anyone's attention, and frankly, I welcome the return to ordinary. It was early May when I finally unlocked the workshop. I hadn't gone back in since the day I found Anna. I hadn't needed to. But the sun was out, and the light had shifted enough that the long shadows no longer looked like warnings. The lock clicked open without resistance. Inside, everything was just as I remembered it. Tools lined up neatly. Cabinets labeled in his handwriting. A jacket of his still hanging on the hook by the door. I stood in the doorway for a while before stepping in. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Nothing threatening. Just stale. I wasn't there to dig through anything. I wasn't looking for more secrets. But I'd promised myself I wouldn't leave this room frozen in memory forever. It needed to be reclaimed. I started by opening the windows. Let the light in. Let the air move. I swept the floor, wiped down the workbench, took the jacket and folded it gently into a box. One small task at a time, until the space started to feel like mine again, or at least like something new could take root there. A week later, I turned it into a potting shed. It wasn't anything elaborate. Just a small table, a stool, shelves for soil and seed packets. But it felt right. Quiet work, useful and honest. I'd plant basil and tomatoes in May, then move on to late-season lettuce. In the winter, I'd start paper whites indoors. The kind of work that doesn't depend on anyone else. The kind you can build with your own two hands. Grace visited once, toward the end of May. She'd been in town for a family matter and asked if she could stop by. I said yes. She didn't come empty-handed. She brought a small potted fig tree. Said it needed more sun than her apartment could offer. We sat on the back steps, drinking tea, watching the bees drift between the lilacs. She didn't ask for updates. She didn't offer any either. But before she left, she reached into her bag and handed me a manila folder. Just in case, she said. Inside were court summaries, printed emails, the custody ruling for Lila, and a sealed note from Anna. I didn't open it until later that night. The note was short. Just 3 sentences, handwritten on plain paper. I never thought I'd be able to leave. Thank you for making that possible. If we ever cross paths again, I hope it's on a better day. There was no signature. Just a folded drawing tucked inside, crayon on scrap paper, clearly done by a child. It showed 2 stick figures holding hands. One labeled Mommy. The other, Grandma. I didn't cry. I just set it on the mantel, beside a jar of sea glass I'd collected years ago on a trip Russell and I took to Nova Scotia. It seemed like a fitting place, memories shaped by weather, softened by time. I was 61 that summer. Old enough to know better than to expect closure. Young enough to start over without apology. It was around that time that I began to say no more freely. Not loudly. Not out of spite. Just as a form of self-respect. Darlene called once to check in. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave a message. Donald tried twice. Once through email, once through a mutual friend. I responded to neither. The people who treated my silence like permission no longer had access to it. One afternoon in July, I ran into Elise at the market. She was standing in front of the dairy section, staring at a row of yogurts. I almost didn't recognize her. She'd cut her hair shorter, wore little makeup, looked tired but composed. I was about to turn away, let her have her space, but she saw me first. She didn't flinch. Just nodded once and stepped toward me. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said. "Or Marianne. I suppose I can say that now." "You can," I said. "How have you been?" She exhaled. "Better than I expected. Not as well as I hoped. But I'm figuring things out." I nodded. "That's fair." She glanced down at the basket in my hand: parsley, red onions, a small loaf of bread. "Your garden must be doing well." "It is." There was a pause. Then she said, "I've told my parents the truth, finally. They didn't want to hear it, but they needed to. I also filed a petition to have the marriage license formally annulled. I know it wasn't legally valid, but I needed the record to reflect what really happened." "That's wise." Elise looked at me then, really looked. "You know, I hated you for about 5 minutes. Not because of what you did. But because you did it before I had the chance. I didn't take it personally. I didn't want to embarrass you," I said. "I just couldn't let it happen." She nodded. "I understand that now." We parted without ceremony. Just a nod, and the soft brush of carts being wheeled in by the front door. I never saw her again. I didn't need to. The moment had been enough. That fall, I decided to travel. Nothing grand. Just a train trip up the coast, some quiet towns I'd always meant to visit. I brought a journal and a stack of books. I stayed in modest places, ate alone when I felt like it, made small talk with strangers who knew nothing about me. I felt invisible in the best way, free from expectation, from history, from the weight of being someone's mother or someone's cautionary tale. On the third morning of the trip, I watched the sunrise from the deck of a bed and breakfast overlooking the water. The air was cold, but clean. I held a cup of coffee with both hands and watched the light change the color of the waves. I didn't think about the wedding, or the workshop, or even Lila. I thought about the future, not as a destination, but as a space. One I could walk through, quietly, without permission. By the time I came home, the leaves had turned. The garden was nearly done for the year, and I spent a weekend clearing out the beds. I made a list of bulbs to plant before the frost, picked up fresh mulch from the nursery, and patched a spot on the roof where the shingles had started to curl. Small, steady work. Not dramatic. Not poetic. But it was mine. Winter came early that year. By mid-November, frost was clinging to the windows each morning, and I'd started lighting the stove earlier in the day just to keep the chill out of the kitchen. I noticed how quiet the house had become, not silent in a cold, abandoned way, but in the way a space becomes when no one is performing for it anymore. I hadn't realized how much of my energy used to go into anticipating other people's needs, smoothing over small tensions, filling up gaps before anyone noticed them. Now, there was just me. And that was enough. I didn't decorate for the holidays the way I used to. I kept a small tree in the front window, strung with lights and a few old ornaments I still liked. The big boxes, full of garlands, wreaths, candle holders, I left in the attic. I baked 1 batch of gingerbread, not 3. No guest list, no pressure, no performance. I made myself a roast on Christmas Eve, poured a glass of red wine, and played the record Russell used to put on when we were younger. It had been years since I sat through the whole thing. I listened to it all the way through this time, letting the soft, nostalgic voice of a long-dead singer fill the corners of my kitchen. At midnight, I stepped out onto the porch with a shawl over my shoulders. The night was clear and sharp. Stars overhead, and the kind of deep cold that makes your breath hang in the air like a question. I stood there a long time, not waiting for anything, not hoping for anything. Just being. Just breathing. The new year arrived without ceremony. In January, I began volunteering twice a week at the community garden. They needed someone to manage the tool shed, help coordinate the seed exchange, and keep things organized through the winter planting season. It gave me purpose, a little company, and a place to go that wasn't wrapped in memory. Nobody there knew about the wedding. Nobody knew about my son, or Anna, or Lila. To them, I was just Marianne, who remembered to label the storage bins and brought fresh coffee on Thursdays. It was a relief to be unremarkable. I kept the workshop too. By then it was fully converted into a potting space. The tools were mine now, not just in ownership, but in spirit. I knew where everything was, and more importantly, I knew what I planned to do with it. I kept a list taped to the back of the door: spring seedlings, soil mixes, dates to start tomatoes. Each task was small, achievable, and fully mine. I still received a few messages from old acquaintances now and then. A former neighbor asking if I was well, an old friend wondering if I'd consider coming to a gathering. I replied politely, but I didn't commit. I wasn't avoiding people, I was just finally making choices based on what I actually wanted, not what I thought I was supposed to do. In February, I heard from Grace again. She called to check in, and when I asked how things were going with Anna and Lila, she said, "They're steady. Anna's started part-time work again. Lila's adjusting. They don't ask for anything, but they're not hiding anymore either." I thanked her. Not just for the information, but for everything. Grace didn't offer comfort, or congratulations. She simply said, "You did what you had to do." And it made a difference. In March, I received a letter. The envelope was plain. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed a wide beach, the same one from the earlier postcard. In the corner, Anna was holding Lila's hand. Their backs were turned, both looking out toward the water. The caption was written in pencil, just below the image. "We're okay." That was it. No explanation. No plea for continued contact. Just a quiet confirmation that their life was moving forward. I keep the photo in a drawer, not out in the open. It's not that I'm hiding it, it's just not something I need to look at every day. I know it's there. That's enough. Sometimes, on warm afternoons, I'll sit on the porch and think about what happened. Not to dwell, but to keep the truth close. I think about the ways women like me are trained to keep things together no matter the cost. To smile through betrayal. To hold our families like cracked china, patching over the breaks, pretending it's still one perfect piece. But I don't pretend anymore. What happened to Anna, what my son did, and what others allowed him to do by staying silent, none of that will be fixed by pretending. That's the difference between shame and responsibility. Shame keeps things buried. Responsibility brings them into the light, even when it's uncomfortable. I've had neighbors pull away since the wedding. People who used to wave, who now cross the street instead. I don't chase them. I don't explain myself. I know what they think, that I ruined something, that I could have kept it quiet, protected the image. But that image was a lie. And I won't protect lies anymore. Some evenings, I open a notebook I keep by my chair and write down the small truths I once kept to myself. Nothing grand, just the things I used to swallow. The ways I made myself smaller, quieter, more agreeable. I write them down so I don't forget what it took to stop doing that. The last page in the book says, "Peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of self." I didn't write that to sound wise. I wrote it because I finally believe it. I don't know what my son tells people now. I imagine he's rewriting the story, casting himself as the one betrayed, the one misunderstood. That's what people like him do. But it doesn't matter. His story is no longer mine to carry. Mine is simpler. I raised a son. I loved him. I saw what he became, and I chose not to look away. And when the time came, I did the thing that was hardest, not for attention, not out of vengeance, but because a woman and a child needed someone to say, "This stops here." That is what I will be remembered for. Not the betrayal. Not the silence that came before. But the voice that ended it. If Lila ever grows curious, if she ever wants to know what happened before her memories begin, I hope Anna will tell her. Not just about what happened to them, but about the day someone stood up in a room full of people and said, "No more." And if she ever comes to find me, I'll be here. Not with answers to every question, but with a place at my table. A garden to show her. A box of seeds to plant. And a name she'll never need to whisper in secret. It had been nearly a year when I received the second letter. I was coming back from the market, keys in one hand and a bag of fresh radishes under my arm, when I found it in the mailbox. No return address. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost formal. Not Anna's, not my son's. When I opened it, I paused in the driveway, letting the wind tug at my coat as I read. Dear Marianne. My name is Eleanor. I work at the community center in Windermere. I've been helping Anna and Lila with their school applications, housing paperwork, and other small things. Anna asked me to send you this letter because she didn't know if it would be better coming from her. Lila has begun asking about you. Not insistently. Just small questions, here and there. She knows something happened. She knows you helped. Anna said she'd respect whatever you chose. There's no pressure. But if you were open to it, they'd be in town for 2 days next month, for a court appearance related to the custody finalization. I've included the date and address. Warmly. Eleanor Davis. The letter was straightforward, respectful. Not emotional, not pleading. Just a possibility placed gently in front of me. I stood there longer than I needed to, the letter pressed between my fingers, the wind rising and falling around me. That evening, I didn't answer right away. I swept the kitchen. Made tea. Trimmed back the dying heads on the orchids by the window. But the thought stayed. Not just of Lila, but of what it might mean to see them again. I had built a life on the other side of silence. Rebuilt it, really. Carefully, brick by brick, with no expectation of repair. But perhaps there was still room for something more. The next morning, I wrote back. Eleanor. Thank you for your note. Please tell Anna I appreciate her thoughtfulness. If she feels it wouldn't confuse or upset Lila, I would be glad to meet them. Warmly. Marianne Hargrove. I mailed it that afternoon. In the weeks that followed, I didn't allow myself to imagine much. Children remember what they're told, and Anna had every right to shield Lila from the details. I expected nothing more than a brief hello, maybe a quiet moment together if it felt right. I didn't press. I didn't prepare anything elaborate. The meeting took place in a public park near the courthouse, open space, benches, a small playground on the edge. I arrived early, sat on a bench with a thermos of coffee in my lap, and waited. Anna approached first. She looked older than I remembered, more tired, but steadier. She carried herself like someone who had lived through something, and wasn't interested in pretending otherwise. Lila walked beside her, holding a stuffed bear. The same dark hair. The same watchful eyes. When they reached me, Anna spoke first. She knows who you are. In the way I thought best to explain it. I nodded, standing slowly. Lila looked up at me. You're the grandma who helped my mom. I crouched to her level. Yes, I am. She studied me for a long second. Are you still mad at my daddy? I didn't lie. I don't think about him very much anymore. She seemed to accept that. Children know when they're being placated. She wasn't looking for a fairy tale. We sat together on the bench while Anna watched from a distance. Lila talked about her school, her teacher, the books she liked. She told me she was learning to make scrambled eggs. She asked if I had any cats. Not yet, I said. But I'm thinking about getting one. She nodded seriously. Black cats are the best. They're quiet. I stayed an hour. That was enough. Before they left, Anna came over, her hand resting lightly on Lila's back. Thank you, she said. For knowing how to do this. Just tell her the truth as she's ready, I said. That's all I ask. They walked away slowly, hand in hand. I stayed on the bench long after they disappeared from view. It didn't feel like a beginning. It felt like something small but real, a place where absence had once been, now filled with something softer. Back at home, I added a note to the notebook I kept in the drawer. A short one. Saw Lila. She's strong. She asked hard things. I didn't flinch. That spring, I did adopt a cat. A scrappy black one from the shelter, missing a patch of fur above his eye. I named him Soot. He followed me around the house like a shadow, curling up at my feet whenever I sat too long in one place. In the workshop, the tomato seedlings took to the light quickly. By May I had 3 dozen of them, upright and ready to plant. I gave half to the community garden, kept the rest for the raised beds out back. Every morning I walked the rows, brushing my fingers along the stems, checking for pests, tying up new growth. No one else needed to see it to make it worthwhile. I'd learned that already. Summer brought more letters from Eleanor. Updates, mostly. Notes about Lila's reading level, her art projects, a school play she was in. Once, Anna added a line in her handwriting, "We're both okay." She asks about you in a way that means she remembers. I didn't reply to every letter. I let them come and go like postcards from another life I'd once made possible. They weren't obligations. They were proof. I stopped mentioning my son altogether, even to myself. I didn't need to forgive him to move on. I just needed to place the memory of him in a box I no longer opened. There's a freedom in that kind of closure, not the loud kind, not the courtroom or headline kind. The quiet one. The kind where you make coffee in the morning, look out the window, and realize you are not waiting for anyone. That fall, I taught a seed-saving workshop at the garden. Small class, maybe a dozen people. Mostly women, mostly older. One younger mother, trying to learn how to grow her own vegetables. She brought her daughter, a little girl with dark hair who reminded me of Lila. She sat on a stool and helped separate dried pods from stems while her mother listened. At the end, she handed me a drawing. A crooked flower in a plastic pot. "Because you're the garden lady," she said. I smiled and thanked her. I added it to the box where I kept Lila's drawing. Not to compare them, but to remember what it felt like to be seen clearly by a child and not turned away. Life didn't transform after that. It didn't need to. But it settled. It shaped itself around what had happened without being consumed by it. And I shaped myself too. Not back into who I was before. That woman is gone. But into someone more whole. Someone who knows now, without hesitation, that silence is never the price of peace.